because Akhmetov let me down. Let me down because usually we have such a group that usually doesn't turn off for 4 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours. Sometimes they skip it altogether. But yesterday there was a complete sabotage against us. I actually had no electricity for 8 hours continuously. And all my UPS systems that power the router are in fact designed for about 6 to 7 hours. And when it reaches 8, everything gets cut off. Was just afraid that it would cut off at the most inconvenient moment. So yesterday Akhmetov let us down, unfortunately, but today everything is fine, everything is working out. So, to everyone watching us, good evening. I even set up the microphone properly, and it should be clearly audible. Well, if something is wrong, write and complain, traditionally. So today is November 22nd, 21. Well, it's already 03 actually, while I've been chatting here. Nevertheless, 3 minutes here, 3 minutes there, it's not really crucial. Well, since today is Friday, and you can already see on the screen that we are with Sergei Rachinsky. Hello, Sergei. And so today we will indeed discuss absolutely everything under whiskey, or whatever else you might possibly have. So please pour yourself a drink. Make yourself comfortable and feel almost entirely at home. This week has been quite eventful. Yes, but first of all, it has been exactly 1,000 days since the full-scale invasion. This week marks 1,000 days of bombings, when every day something hits. If it's not a missile, then a Shahed drone. If not a Shahed, then artillery shelling. People die every day, and this nightmare continues for 1,000 days. Moreover, this week marks 20 years since the Orange Revolution, and 11 years since the start of Euromaidan, so we even have a reason to celebrate the Day of Dignity and Freedom. In general, a lot has happened here over the past few months, and besides that, for the first time in history, we were unexpectedly hit by an intercontinental ballistic missile. The Russians launched an intercontinental missile with 6 separating parts under Dnipro, which further divide into 6 parts each, meaning 36 iron projectiles were launched under Dnipro. Of course, it's not a pleasant sight. But it's truly interesting. It's a chilling spectacle. And on the other hand, you feel like you're in some completely surreal situation.
By the way, this week Zelensky quite openly stated that in essence Ukraine has turned into a testing ground. And this is, in general, absolutely correct. Moreover, it is a very profound observation. I'm absolutely sure that Zelensky himself does not realize how deeply he has dug when he called what is happening a testing ground. That is, I have repeatedly pointed out in the past, and it seems to me that the situation only confirms that, in general, this war is precisely about Ukraine being turned into a testing ground where Russia is staging a bloody, demonstrative slaughter aimed at attracting the attention of external, so to speak, observers. We even know well who these observers are. So the fact that Ukraine has been assigned such a horrific role in this whole story, which is stubbornly called a war, but in principle I think it's unlikely that a war looks like the beating of people on a testing ground, especially with diverse, so to speak, experimental weapons, among other things. It is abundantly clear that this is the direct result of the 30-year policy pursued by the Ukrainian governmental state, which has led, so to speak, to such a state in various ways. We are lucky, and in principle we are happy that Putin did not take into account that the state of Ukraine and Ukrainians as such are different entities, different phenomena. We have shown our capabilities, our desires, our priorities, values, and so on. However, the Ukrainian state has undoubtedly utterly failed, and it has failed demonstratively in a very public manner. This is not just inaction, it is systematic harm that has ultimately resulted, I repeat, in the transformation, according to the very president of Ukraine, into a kind of experimental testing ground where anything can be done because Russia, in principle, bears no real responsibility for what is happening without any significant consequences. That is, yes, it costs the Russians dearly. They are spending resources they are losing, so to speak, living people, and so on. But generally speaking, in essence, by and large, in a manner of speaking, these are incomparable losses to those borne by Ukraine. That is, this is definitely a one-sided game. This one-sided game should not have started. That is, when we say that the state has failed in this war, we primarily mean, of course, the beginning of this war itself. It should not have been allowed under any circumstances. And then there are these reckless, so to speak, assurances that yes, indeed, we will quickly sort this out, divide Russia into parts, and so on. This is undoubtedly and unquestionably irresponsible behavior on the part of the authorities. It generally backfires all the time and results in even greater sacrifices for us.
Well, it should be said that, in fact, I apologize. There were attempts to prevent the war. Here are the Omani agreements.
Well, attempts are not really the right format of action. Well, they sold out the normal ones, gave up the passage to Crimea, and agreed that quickly, it's not for nothing that Zhiriatsky said. Everyone would be grilling shashliks in May because there were agreements, and they were obviously coordinated with the Americans about having a corridor to Crimea. In fact, the picture showed that Putin clearly had a blitzkrieg plan, meaning he was counting on quickly wrapping everything up here and then demonstrating the results to Europe. Europe was frozen in anticipation of a quick resolution and didn't want to get involved in all this. So history has shown that many things did not go as planned. Nevertheless, the very idea that we can engage in a protracted war is completely absurd in any way in its essence. It is clear that it is possible, but what does it cost us in the end? That is, we do not understand and are not aware of all the consequences that this war will have in the future. Well, at least, so to speak, people undoubtedly hope for the best. And indeed, in particular, I would like to start today with the news that says that I think that news, in fact, is about the publication of the results of the Gallup agency's surveys. Gallup certainly does not, like the surveys of Ukrainian sociologists, they conducted their own research here, well, through partners certainly, but nevertheless, they released this research under their own brand. And according to this recent and comprehensive research study, which took place in October of this year, on average, approximately 52% of Ukrainians would like the country to agree on a quick end to the war. That is, more than half of Ukrainians, and I think that in general, a significant part of people also thinks the same way, but does not speak about it just in case, because Ukrainians are well trained, in general, in this property of answering correctly to the asked question. So it can be said unequivocally that a significant part, a large majority of Ukrainians is inclined to end this war as quickly as possible. And when the authorities tell us about how we have certainly agreed on the supplies of this and that, and how we have undoubtedly been allowed to shoot and so on, it is completely not about that. That is, certainly the discussion should be about the quickest possible end to the war. Because when we are told that, well, listen, this is a fiasco, it means a loss of territory and so on. So I would remind you that we have already, in general, talked about this in this broadcast, that a significant part of the territories was lost much earlier. That is, the Ukrainian authorities lost control of the east long before Maidan and before Putin appeared here, with his troops. This happened during Yushchenko's time. That is, it is a consequence of Yanukovych's policies, or rather that of Kuchma, who organized a system of laundering budget money in eastern Ukraine. And when this money ran out, the region was simply abandoned. It was left to fend for itself, which meant it was left to bandits who were ready to do anything there. The same story applies to Crimea. There was never any clear and coherent policy regarding Crimea, other than appeasement, so to speak, and flirting. And all of this ended very badly, long before 2013. Therefore, in this sense, I believe that the swift cessation of the war, which more than half of Ukrainians advocate for, has no alternative. Moreover, in fact, engaging in war until victory is supported by only a little over a third. But at the same time, this third has a very poor understanding of what this victory entails. Just recently, we were talking about the borders of 1991. Now, this is basically not mentioned anymore. Crimea, according to the president this week, said that we will return Crimea through diplomatic means. Wonderful. Then why not return everything else through diplomatic means? Why should people die there every day? Why should peaceful people die in cities? It is because we decided to return something through diplomatic means and something not diplomatically. In general, this entire concept is collapsing. It is crumbling before our eyes, and no coherent concept is, so to speak, visible. That is, all hope is that ultimately, hopefully, in the end, the West will collectively gather and see this matter through to the end, according to which, in some particular manner, Putin will eventually be seated at the negotiating table, and we will learn the conditions under which this peace is indeed possible. Because when they say that nothing will be decided without Ukraine, I think it's unlikely that anyone believes Ukraine is capable of seriously defending any positions. Most likely, these positions will simply be conveyed to the Ukrainian delegation. In this particular regard, it was rather quite amusing to read and analyze the official statement from President Biden's advisors that success on the front now depends significantly more on the strategic mobilization, that is, on increasing the number of military fighters and personnel, as opposed to solely relying on the supply and provision of advanced weaponry. This also contradicts in general the concept that the authorities have been conveying to us lately. That is, if we listen to the official statements from Kyiv, they constantly talk about the lack of weapons, that deliveries are delayed, that they are incomplete, that they are not timely, and that what we need is not being supplied. And the West, on the contrary, pays attention to the fact that all their so-called qualitative leaps ultimately led to nothing. That is, tanks appeared. This did not yield any results. There appeared then airplanes. This did not yield any results. And from the front, I keep repeating this, there is a constant conversation about giving us more ordinary mortars. Well, then we will be able to engage in combat more effectively. In general, this mess continues, and as a result, it will not lead to anything good. Because indeed, by no means can the situation be resolved today. The number of people, that is, we, will simply increase the number of casualties. So yes, the number of casualties will allow our authorities to ask for more money. This is, in fact, the straightforward logic behind these actions.
But on the other hand, I apologize, I will interrupt you again, because with Sullivan, everything is bad, because he says that they gave tanks, but there are only 31 tanks. Our forces destroyed approximately 9,000 rods from the Russians, practically 9,031. Let's compare. They say that we gave planes, but the Americans did not give a single plane. We have 18 F-16s that were given by Denmark and the Netherlands. That's all. Therefore, before this, 3 Americans along with Europeans took us, and in total eliminated 3 million mines. 3 million infantry mines were finished being destroyed in 2017, and after that they tell us, well, how are you fighting? Well, this is how we fight.
And received the mines, it seems, only by accident.
And we haven't received them yet, they were promised. Moreover, The promised smart mines, which are supposedly some kind of smart, are few. So, compared to the 3 million that were destroyed under the Partnership for Peace program and other European programs, this is laughable.
But it should be understood that the initiative for these defensive actions comes from our headquarters. Well, in the end, who is responsible for the battlefield? So that's the whole point. If you are sitting here in Kiev or wherever they are sitting, if you are unable to plan, if you are unable to solve tactical, practical tasks, then let's reconsider this strategy. You can't conduct these actions at a level like we asked, you didn't give, and why have you let us down again, and so on and so forth. So now we clearly see this shifting of responsibility to the West. Well, the West is to blame, it has failed everything.
It's always like that with bureaucrats. There always has to be someone to blame. The West kicks us saying we are to blame. I mean our government. Our people kick it back to them.
There, Europeans blame the Americans. This is normal statistics. So this is the price of such a game.
It always turns out with victims. The only question is, are there visible victims or are there invisible ones? In this case, we see the result of these actions.
We still do not fully know all the consequences, because for now we are being shown a measured truth that is unlikely to correspond to the real picture. However, we see why we recalled this statement by Sullivan that in Washington they are still playing, so to speak, the same game. That is, they're not drawing any conclusions, they are not making any adjustments. They are absorbed in this universe of their billions of dollars, a world of these reports that they constantly provide to each other. And this does not solve anything in war, so to speak. That is, we see that there is generally nothing more to continue here. That is, when we are told there is an alternative. Either we negotiate and concede something, or we continue to fight. There is nothing more to continue. We see that there is nothing tangible or concrete to implement that could look like some conscious activity aimed at achieving a military result. We have nothing to rely on in any way. We have failures everywhere, setups everywhere, and everywhere there is betrayal. That is the whole point. So why are Ukrainians wise people? They understand perfectly that this matter needs to be wrapped up because there is not much to hope for here. Those who say that we must fight to a victorious end are people who are simply unaccustomed, so to speak, to being responsible for their actions. In this case, they say this simply to cater to the propaganda campaign, which has not quieted down until now. Before we move on to the news that we decided to focus on in more detail, this is not so much news as a very large and important article in foreign policy. I want to remind you of an interesting detail from this week. Indeed, all EU countries now have to apprehend and detain Netanyahu if he appears on their territory in all circumstances. Do you understand? This is the theater of the absurd. It is starting to gain some completely indecent momentum. So, the chief diplomat of the EU, Josep Borrell, stated that now, if Netanyahu or the former defense minister, Gallant, appear anywhere in the European Union, they need to be arrested and, so to speak, sent to Kotoski. At the same time, Hungary offered for Netanyahu to come and demonstratively show that they will not arrest him. That is, the European Union is playing some entirely special game of its own. In a way, it is clearly detached from reality. That is, I am not even trying to assess the actions of the Israeli authorities in this situation with the confrontation against terrorism. But the logic of the behavior of European authorities is becoming simply dangerous because completely unexpected things are appearing that no one could have anticipated. And I would like to remind you that at one time the European Union supported Israel in its confrontation with the Arab world, so to speak. with the same Palestinian terrorists. So much so that it ended in an energy crisis, meaning that in the 1970s, the European Union suffered tremendous damage from consistently supporting Israel, a significant impact. And now they are, in general, in some very strange position, which does not bring them honor. Don't know. That is, of course, the court is undoubtedly sacred for Europeans, but in this case, it seems to me that a more appropriate position should have been taken, corresponding to what is happening in the Middle East. Well, I want to return in more detail to the article in Foreign Policy. Why did it catch my attention? I quoted it extensively and thoroughly in one of my detailed digests this week. It discusses a rather significant and important topic. Recently, we have been hearing a lot about how remarkably good the Russian economy is, how it is effectively fighting the numerous problems caused by the ongoing war, how the Russians are persistently battling inflation, and how they skillfully and strategically conduct financial policy that allows them to navigate the complex difficulties inevitable during the transition of the economy to so-called military rails. But the authors of the article in the American publication have taken it upon themselves to delve more deeply into this topic. And it seems to me that, in my opinion, they are saying very correct things. Undoubtedly, and without a doubt, Russia, due to being a totally state-controlled economy, absolutely means that the state controls almost all key areas and aspects of economic life in various ways. It is simply foolish in reality to talk about or even consider any market processes there in any meaningful way. In such a context, that is, when it is expected that a change in the rate or changes in other indicators of market activity, changes in the ruble exchange rate will trigger certain market processes. I think it is naive because all these processes have long been stifled and suppressed by state regulation. Thus, we see, in principle, an artificially created economy that functions